If you were practicing medicine in 2022, you remember the panic. As a pediatric PA and dietitian, I sure do. We had empty shelves, frantic phone calls, and parents just trying to find the one formula that their infant tolerated. It all started with a formula recall and a manufacturing plant shutdown, leading to a nationwide infant formula shortage. And in response, the FDA opened the door to imported formulas, changing the United States formula landscape overnight. Since then, we've seen formulas that we've never even heard of before, like Kabrita, which is a goat milk based infant formula that originated in Europe. And now it's the first and only goat milk based infant formula to complete the full FDA review process and meet all of the US requirements for sale. I'm Colleen, and on the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast today, we're unpacking Kabrita and why you should consider it as a first-line option for healthy term infants. But let's be honest, goat milk raises some questions for clinicians here in the US. Is it safe? Is it just a fad? And how do we guide our families confidently when there are so many formula options? This episode is sponsored by Kabrita, and I'm so honored to be joined by their Chief Medical Advisor, Dr. Ari Brown. She's a board-certified pediatrician, health communicator, and author of the best-selling Baby 411 series. Today, we're going to talk about how goat milk-based infant formula supports digestion and tolerance compared to cow's milk-based formula. We're going to talk about the fussy-but-not-allergic infant and when goat milk-based infant formula may be worth trying. You'll learn exactly what to say when parents are asking about European imports or formula intolerance. You'll also learn why goat milk-based infant formula like Kabrita deserves consideration as a first-line option. So if you've ever been curious about goat milk-based infant formula, you're going to love this conversation. So let's get started. Dr. Brown, I am so excited to unpack this topic with you. So thanks so much for coming onto the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate everything that you do.
Okay, so this is a biggie topic, but I want to get some terminology straight first, because when it comes to infant formula, many parents and honestly clinicians assume that formula is, quote, FDA approved. That's actually not the case. And I want to make it clear that the FDA does not actually approve formulas before they go to market. Manufacturers are actually required to notify the FDA and demonstrate that their product meets all federal standards for nutrition labeling and safety. And I want to read something from the FDA. So it says, quote, all infant formula products sold in the US, whether produced domestically or imported, must meet all US requirements, including those for safety and nutritional adequacy. So with that in mind, let's start with the big picture. What are the specific FDA requirements that an infant formula must meet to be legally sold in the US? And has Kabrita met those standards?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this question up. And I think it is important to really understand the process. Just at the very top, though, as we have a conversation about formula, I want to preface this by saying that I think all of us agree that people should confidently feed their babies without guilt, and that we all support human milk as the perfect food for your babies, right? But not every family can or wants to exclusively breastfeed. And we want families to feel good that they can combo feed or exclusively formula feed their babies, and their babies will thrive. But that said, looking at the marketplace for formula is a little bit overwhelming for families, as are for practitioners who are giving families advice about infant formula. So to be sold legally in the US on store shelves, the infant formula must meet FDA guidelines. That means all of the ingredients have to be generally recognized as safe for infants, so GRAS certified. They have to prove in a clinical trial that babies actually grow appropriately and thrive, and their manufacturing and supply chain process undergoes regular inspections, and then there's a consistent supply available. Now, what guidelines are required are 30 macronutrients and micronutrients, including folic acid. And I put that out there because we're going to talk about goat milk and goat milk-based infant formula. Yes, folic acid is one of the requirements. And so the Infant Formula Act is what is used as the current guidelines for what has to be in a product. And so, yes, Kabrita has gone through the entire regulatory process. At the end of the day, you're right, the FDA doesn't approve. It says we have no further questions. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean there are other products that are out on the market. And we'll talk about that and what emergency use authorization looks like and how other products are actually available. And that has never kept people from bootlegging formula from other countries to buy their product. But to actually be sold on store shelves, you have to meet all of those guidelines. And Kabrita has done the entire process.
Yeah, infant formula, it has the most strict standards and guidelines. And so I always encourage parents like your formula that you're feeding your baby is safe. If it's met all of these guidelines, even though we don't have that label FDA approved, it doesn't really work like that. So I'm glad that we unpacked those requirements and what those standards are for infant formulas to be legally sold. I love that you put that caveat out there. And, a lot of clinicians first heard about European formulas during the 2022 formula shortage. I mean, that was like a whirlwind for all of us. It was pretty wild. And so I would love for you if you could just explain what happened during that formula fly-in and how that opened the door to other options, at least in the United States, to formulas like Kabrita. And then I would love for you to clarify, why were some imported formulas allowed into the US during that time, even if they hadn't gone through the usual FDA review process that we just discussed?
Sure. So, I think it's unfortunate that there is not a universal global requirement for formula ingredients or the manufacturing process, because I think it would simplify and actually diversify our options for infant formulas. And I think we unfortunately learned the hard way that because we have our own US guidelines in 2022, when there were only a few manufacturers legally able to sell in the US, and we lost, almost half of our infant formula supply overnight. This, was an eye opener for everybody. And so that led our government to seek out other infant formula options. And thankfully, there were several manufacturers globally that said, we can supply these products, but they are not necessarily meeting all of the FDA regulations. And so that offered products to enter the US market under what's called emergency use authorization. And so those products are still on the market, like they are still being sold on store shelves. But to be able to stay in the United States and be sold legally, now they have to go through the entire FDA regulatory process to be able to stay here. And so that supply is not assured and certain because it is a very long road. And so what I will say is that it's great because now we have many more infant formula options, and parents, you don't have to be, again, kind of going through these gray markets to get products that they may want to get. But what I will say, and again, I'm the medical advisor for Kabrita. Kabrita actually started this entire process before the 2022 shortage. And so they were several steps ahead of these other infant formulas coming globally. Kabrita is a Dutch-made product and is manufactured in the Netherlands. So Kabrita is fully regulated and is not under the emergency use authorization.
Yeah, so that brings us to goat milk because it's not a common milk in the States, at least. And I think that's where sometimes something new can be scary. And if we don't feel confident in it because we don't know enough information about it, that we might not be recommending it. So I would love for you to unpack exactly how does goat milk differ from cow's milk, which is what we're used to in the States, cow's milk infant formula. So how do those two differ in their ingredients?
Okay, well, we're going to take a deep dive. So, and we'll nerd out a little bit together. But the first thing I'm going to say is, it's new to American practitioners, but it is not new globally. We are very late to this party, and so it seems real new to us. But goat milk infant formula has been used for decades internationally, and it's a very popular product, and there are reasons why. And so the first thing I will say about the ingredients is that ingredients do matter, and especially the protein. And that's what I think is probably the secret sauce to goat milk-based infant formula is the protein. So we're going back to, basic biochemistry, but even, back to our nursery rhymes and Little Miss Muffet and her curds and whey, right? So there are two main proteins. And so there's casein and there's whey. And the goat milk casein proteins are actually more similar to breast milk than cow milk casein protein. So there's more beta casein volume in goat milk, which is more similar to human milk. There's more alpha S2 casein in goat milk, and there's less alpha 1 casein, which is what's found in cow milk and is more difficult to digest. And so that's one of the key reasons is the casein, the curds, when they start to get digested, the curds are actually softer and looser. And so it's gentler because it's easier for the baby to digest. And then looking at the whey protein, so goat is beta lactoglobulin, and it is structurally different from cow beta lactoglobulin. And that whey protein in goat milk is actually, it has a faster transit time, more similar to breast milk. And so if you look at studies, about 50%, and actually Kabrita did a study on goat milk-based formula versus cow milk-based formula versus human milk. And if you look at the transit time for that whey protein, 50% is already digested within 2 hours and it's moving along. Whereas for the cow milk whey, it's only 30% is digested within 2 hours. And so that faster transit time makes the poop softer because it's it's more similar to the breast milk. So you've got the casein differences and the whey differences, which I think are probably the key difference between cow milk-based infant formula and goat milk-based infant formula. When you look at sugar, for Kabrita, the number one ingredient is lactose because breast milk, number one ingredient is lactose. So that is the key sugar. But then looking at goat milk-based infant formulas in general, oligosaccharides, there are differences in the oligosaccharides, and we can talk about that a little bit further. But it turns out that the number of oligosaccharides and the diversity of the population, again, is more plentiful in goat milk versus cow milk. And then it comes to fats. And so Kabrita, okay, this is going to be a real deep dive on biochem, but I'm going to give you, I actually have a visual aid for you. Okay, so this is my visual aid. And yes, there were some cocktail olives that were sacrificed for this. But, fat molecules, triglycerides, you have this glycerol backbone, and then you've got the 3 fatty acids. And so one of the main fats in breast milk is palmitic acid, SN2 palmitic acid. And so Kabrita actually tries to approximate that by using SN2 or OPO, palmitic acid. That's very different from palm oil. And that's why I want to explain kind of what happens in the digestive process. So when fats get digested in the gut, the digestive enzymes will actually cleave off the first and third position. And so you've seen one getting cleaved off here. Here's the other one that gets cleaved. But what remains is this in the center. And so palm oil is actually POP position. So the palmitic acid is on these ends. And as I was talking about the palmitic acid that is in human milk and in Kabrita's product, it's actually OPO. So what remains is what's in the center position. And so when the palmitic acid comes off in the digestive process for palm oil, it absorbs calcium. And what happens is you've got palmitic acid fat and calcium salts or soaps that are kind of floating around, and they get pooped out as opposed to being absorbed. And so specifically Kabrita and human milk, the reason why the palmitic acid and the OPO position is helpful is because you have better calcium absorption, better fat absorption, and that also helps with pooping. So you have improved bone density as well as stool consistency. And so that's why that fat is used particularly in Kabrita. But overall, those are your macronutrients and why they're helpful and why, again, goat milk-based infant formula is really popular. At the end of the day, it's because of the protein.
Okay, I loved our biochemistry lesson we just had. That was so fun. And I know all of my PD nutrition nerds are like, That was awesome. Because I think it's really important to understand the ingredients, exactly what is included in this formula, what makes it unique, but then also how does that impact digestion? So thank you for that very clear, very thorough explanation. Now that my American clinicians know that Kabrita is a fantastic, safe, appropriate option for all healthy term babies, where can our families purchase this?
Kabrita is available everywhere, and it's actually now at Walmart. So you can find it anywhere. You can get it online, walmart.com also. But yeah, it's super exciting that many grocery stores and chains and big box stores, including Walmart, actually sell it.
That's really, really exciting that it's accessible to our families. So I'm really excited about that as well. Okay, you had mentioned oligosaccharides. And so I wanted to unpack that a little bit. And if you guys are not sure what that is, those are prebiotics. And so Kabrita includes both added and natural prebiotics. So I would love to hear, what role do these play in supporting gut health?
Right. So, we hear so much about prebiotics and probiotics, but prebiotics is the nice nest for those probiotics. And so they turn out to be really important as a bioactive ingredient. And what's, interesting is goat milk itself, unmodified, already naturally has more oligosaccharides, as well as the diversity of them, which allows a broader population to kind of nest and foster this microbiome. And so we're already starting baseline with kind of a better product compared to cow milk. But then Kabrita does add additional oligosaccharides. And so, again, you're trying to approximate human milk oligosaccharides, right? And you're never going to meet exactly what breast milk can offer, because breast milk has huge numbers of human milk oligosaccharides. But Kabrita has about 6 times the amount that's found in cow milk. And again, that is a key difference for why you get softer stools. And so it helps, the gut, but it also helps the immune system. And that's the other evidence. And I think bioactives are really fascinating. I mean, I think that's the next frontier for infant formulas, is how can we effectively put in all of these bioactive ingredients to really foster baby's health and nutrition. But anyway, that's the reason why that's there, and that's why there's more added.
I think you're right. Prebiotics, probiotics, it's sort of the wave of the future. And there's so many studies, even in adult medicine, but specifically in infant nutrition, on the impact on gut health, immunity. So I'm really excited for the advancements in that area of nutrition science. So more to come with that, but that definitely makes Kabrita unique in how it helps with infant immunity. And so I want to linger on another thing that you had mentioned when you were giving us our biochemistry class on Kabrita formula, and that is protein, and specifically the whey to casein ratio. And I think this matters. So I would love for you to unpack what the difference is between Kabrita's infant formula and cow's milk formula, and why does that whey to casein ratio actually matter?
Right. So, as a reminder, I think we all kind of gloss over this, is there's a reason why it's called infant formula, because it's a chemical formula, right? It's modified. And I kind of touched upon that when I was talking about folic acid too, is so what you're trying to do is recreate breast milk as much as you can. And so both, cow milk and goat milk, naturally, your whey to casein ratio is 20/80. And so that's not breast milk. Breast milk is 60/40. And so you want to have, more whey, because again, the transit time is faster. It's easier to digest. We look at Mother Nature and how did this breast milk, become the perfect food for babies? And so, there's a reason why it is that ratio. And so infant formula is modified to meet those numbers. And so Kabrita has a 60/40 ratio, just like mature breast milk. And again, when you're looking at the whey protein, it's about digestion and transit time. And for Kabrita specifically, that transit time, 50% of the whey is actually digested within 2 hours versus the whey protein in cow milk, which is 35%. So it's not just the ratio, it's also the type of whey.
Yeah, and that faster transit time just makes it easier to digest. And then, of course, less constipation. And that's what we want for all of our babies. And so
Right.
I love that Kabrita is very evidence-based, and they've got a lot of studies and science supporting their claims, but also supporting their ingredients. And so are there any clinical studies, or maybe just newer evidence, that support goat milk formula's effect on digestion overall?
Yes, and there are several. So I'm not going to rattle off a whole list on this, but I definitely encourage everyone to go to the website that is for medical providers, which is medical.cabrita.com. fussy-but-not-allergic.com for a deep dive, and you can get links and read all the research that supports why this is a pretty cool product. And I will tell you, Kabrita is an evidence-based company. And I am at heart a skeptic, as I hope all of us are, as medical providers. Like, my mantra is show me the science. Like, you got to show me the science, because I'm not going to recommend anything or offer treatment to any of my patients until I feel confident in looking at the data. And that's one of the cool things about Kabrita is they feel really strongly about that and doing it right and supporting their claims. And so, yes, so please go to the website and get more information, and you can read all the data.
Check the show notes, you guys, for the link to the Kabrita medical professional site for all of their research and studies if you want to do a deep dive on the science behind Kabrita. All right, now that we understand a little bit more about Kabrita and its ingredients, I think it's important to have an idea of what type of baby might actually benefit from a goat milk based formula.
Well, first of all, I will say every baby. I think, again, as American providers, we're so used to cow milk infant formula is the first, recommendation. But actually, if you look at the AAP guidelines, which actually changed in 2023 and are in the new AAP nutrition handbook, they actually call out goat milk based and cow milk based as a first line product for all babies. So that's the good news. Specifically, yes, fussy babies. I think if you have a patient who is taking a cow milk based infant formula and you're getting lots of phone calls and lots of concerns from your parents, which we all do. Let me tell you, I still am in the office every day. And, you've got these babies who are just uncomfortable, but they don't have a cow milk protein allergy, which I think is important to talk about. But, for 97% of these fussy babies who, we kind of put into this zone of intolerance, those babies do great with goat milk-based infant formula. And I do think it's all about, it's easier to digest. The curds are smaller and looser. They have softer poops. It's more like breast milk. It's just easier for them to tolerate. But I do think it's a great product for all babies. And I don't think that you need to wait until the baby has a problem or preferentially choose cow milk-based just because that's the way we've always done it in the US.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, and something that might be new for a lot of pediatricians is because we are so used to cow's milk based infant formula. And so the baby doesn't just have to be reflux baby, colicky, constipated. It's for all babies. So I'm really glad that you made that distinction for us, because that gives us the ability to now give options to the parents. And you mentioned something important, and I wanted to unpack this a little bit. So let's clarify that distinction between cow's milk intolerance and a true cow's milk protein allergy, and which of these cases might goat milk be an option, because this is really important. So if you guys are multitasking, come back to me so you can really get a clear understanding of cow's milk protein allergy and when goat milk would be appropriate or not.
Yeah. So as a practicing pediatrician, I think this is one of our great frustrations, right? Is that there isn't a perfect test to be able to say, oh, yes, your child truly has a cow milk protein allergy. And if you look at the data, there are way more babies that are on hypoallergenic formulas than need to be, because again, only 3% of babies actually have a cow milk protein allergy. So, for the kids who truly have an IgE mediated, great, but that number is so much lower. So I do think we tend to overcall as clinicians babies who don't actually have that allergy. If they do, it is true that mammalian milks are too similar and you do want to cut that out. And if you look at, actually, there's some really interesting data about even when you do cut it out, you want to reintroduce it as soon as you can, because, we have this potential of creating a whole new generation of kids who are allergic to, long-term cow milk allergy by keeping that out of breastfeeding mom's diet and keeping it out of their diet and infant formula. So even that subset of kids, we want to be mindful of reintroducing it. But for the other 97%, how do you decide? And so one thing that I've come across as, being able to work with Kabrita, there is a objective scale that is used internationally that's very popular, and a lot of research posters were referring to something called the COMIS scale, of which American providers have no idea what the COMIS scale is, but it's actually a cow milk allergy versus intolerance grading scale. And it's not 100%, but it's a questionnaire that families can actually answer that look at some of these symptoms that we typically see. So, how many hours is your baby crying? How uncomfortable are they? Do they have reflux symptoms? Is there a change in their stool? Do they have some respiratory symptoms? Do they have skin symptoms? And so, interestingly, if you score that out, there are very few kids who actually will meet the criterion for cow milk allergy. And you can be more objective in saying, well, your child doesn't have a true allergy. So we don't need to go to these hyperallergenic formulas. We don't need to put you on this restrictive diet if you're breastfeeding. And I think it makes it a little bit easier to wrap our heads around. But again, for those kids who really have symptoms of discomfort, which is not insignificant, they are unhappy babies and these are unhappy parents, right? Those kids, they have options, and it doesn't have to be hypoallergenic formula because they don't have a true allergy.
Oh, that is fantastic. So fascinating. And so I think you're right. I think we as pediatricians should not be dismissive if we can confidently say, okay, your baby is not allergic to the cow's milk protein. It's not an allergy. But we don't want to dismiss that the baby's just so uncomfortable and therefore making mom and dad uncomfortable, stressed out, sleep deprived, right? We still want to provide solutions. And that's where I think Kabrita is just stepping in and creating an option for these families who they're sort of in that messy middle of like, okay, they're not allergic to the milk, but they're so uncomfortable with it. And I think that's a great opportunity for clinicians to say, hey, let's try a goat milk. Let's see if she's more comfortable there. Okay, this has been such a fun conversation. And so I wanted to just kind of wrap things up and ask you what you wish more providers knew about goat milk based infant formula that might help them guide the conversation with their families a little bit more confidently.
The one key thing to know is that the American Academy of Pediatrics Nutrition Handbook updated their comments. And actually, I'll read to you what their handbook says from 2025. The evidence has shown goat milk based infant formula supports adequate growth, is well tolerated, and is safe for infant consumptions. Infants consuming goat milk based formula may have fewer allergies, improved stool consistency, and reduced crying episodes as compared with cow milk formula. So it's not new anywhere else except for here. And there's a reason why it's so popular worldwide. But I think as far as babies and being happy babies who are comfortable and tolerate the product, that's the message for American clinicians is we're maybe a little bit behind in learning about this product that other families have used for a really long time.
Well, and I think having that AAP statement can make American clinicians much more confident, right? Because those are our standards, that is our guidelines. So I think that is really, really helpful and making us feel confident to try something new to us that's been used, worldwide for a really long time. All right, you have written a fantastic book. And so I would love to hear more about that. But there's a chapter on infant feeding, which is now an ebook that clinicians can have for free. And so how can my listeners access that and learn more about that? And then where can they connect with you and Kabrita if they wanted to learn more about you?
Yeah. So Kabrita and I have allowed an excerpt of our formula chapter to be downloaded, available, and it's free to providers and to parents. So if you're interested, you can go to medical.kabrita.com and you can download my formula chapter. But my books are available wherever books are sold. So Baby 411, Toddler 411, and Expecting 411. And you can always find me online at Ari Brown, MD.
So, Dr. Brown, this has been such an eye-opening and exciting conversation. Thank you so much for just teaching us about goat milk infant formula because a lot of us we're new to it. So, hopefully you guys feel more confident in recommending goat milk-based infant formulas to your families. But Dr. Brown, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your wisdom that you shared with us today.
Thank you so much. It's been fun.
All right, now it's time for my nutrition notes. So before we wrap up, I wanted to remind you of something very crucial when you're discussing infant formulas with your families. And this is regardless of what infant formula they are using. But in light of the variety of formulas, you should ask every family this one question: how are you mixing the baby's formula? Now, it might seem like an obvious basic question, but it can uncover some serious issues. So here's why I want you to ask this question. First of all, imported formulas may have different mixing instructions than the standard American formulas. So it's essential that you tell your families to follow the instructions on the can of formula that they are feeding to their infant. If the family is using too much water, this can dilute the nutrients, which can lead to nutrient deficiencies and insufficient calories. On the flip side, if they're using too little water, the formula can end up being concentrated, which can place stress on the baby's kidneys and disrupt electrolyte balance, potentially leading to dehydration and even seizures. Another piece of information you should share with your families is to instruct them to always use the scoop that is included with that infant formula. I would encourage against using like a baby Brezza or those cappuccino-like infant formula makers, because it's really, really important to use that specific scoop with that formula. And lastly, instruct them to add water first and then add the powdered formula. Now, unless you are giving specific mixing instructions for a medical condition, the safest approach is for the family to use the instructions from the manufacturer exactly as written. Well, I hope this episode provided you with the clarity and confidence to better guide families who are exploring their formula options, like Kabrita. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to send me an email at colleen@examroomnutrition.com or shoot me a DM on Instagram at examroomnutrition. And as always, let's continue to make our patients healthier, one exam room at a time. I'll see you next time.